You are listening to Inside IASB, a podcast series dedicated to informing and encouraging Illinois School Board members.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast. My name is Isaac Warren. I'm the Director of Digital Communications at the Illinois Association of School Boards. And with me today, I have Allison Fosdick from Indian Prairie Community Unit School District 204 to discuss her experience attending the Joint Annual Conference, specifically a panel talking about student voices and how she took that back to her board and implemented some changes. So, Allison, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
And just so our listeners have a little bit of context, could you tell me just a little bit about who you are, what you do at the on your school board, and how long you've been serving there?
Yes. So I was just recently reelected for my second term. I was first elected in 2021. I'm a very part-time college instructor for English. So student voice has always been of particular interest to me as a teacher, interacting with students, being able to hear their opinions on things and helping them make change for their own world has been really important to me.
Yeah, all right. Thanks for sharing that. And we're just going to dive right in and get started on some questions. So let's just start with your experience at the Joint Annual Conference in Chicago. What initially drew your attention to the Student Voices panel, and what stood out to you while you were attending that session?
Well, I will tell you this. From the first time I went in 2021 to the Joint Annual Conference, I have found it to be one of the most invigorating things I get to do for an education opportunity as a board member. And a little history about student voice in 204 before we jump in.
Sure.
I was elected in 2021, but there had been formal interest from a group of high school students pre-COVID that reignited about the time I was elected. A social studies teacher at one of the high schools was able to connect with district administration, namely Dr. Nicole Howard, our assistant superintendent of high schools. And students were advocating for student representation on the board. And we spent time from 2021 to 2022 going back and forth between the students and the board, figuring out what that could look like. And as a teacher, I volunteered to be one of the two board members working with students on this proposal, because I really believe in the power of student voice. All board members were interested and believe in the importance of it, but there was some concern, particularly post-COVID, about the need to protect our students from potentially contentious public opinion or comments. Sometimes there were some tense atmospheres. But fast forward to the Joint Annual Conference in 2022, it felt like it was meant to be. We had been going back and forth for about a year about how to make student voice work in our district at the board level. But then there was a student voice presentation from Oswego District 308 from their student ambassador program. They had the superintendent and the students themselves there were part of the presentation. So it was a perfect opportunity for me to learn more about a district that had implemented formalized student voice, hear about how they did it, their timeline, and to learn more about it.
Awesome. Yeah. And so in a way, you're right. It does sound like the stars really align. You're already interested in this topic, and we just happen to have one at the Joint Annual Conference ready for you to attend. And that's really exciting. That's kind of what we're trying to do at the Joint Annual Conference. We want to make sure we get those panels that really stick out and are of interest to people, because we use member feedback for deciding how these panels get determined for each year. And so that's kind of a good example of that working. So that's really exciting.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you mentioned that your district was then inspired once you came back from the Joint Annual Conference to take action. So could you walk us through the first steps you took to begin incorporating student voice into your district's practices?
Yes, absolutely. So we were fortunate to have Dr. Howard reach out to other districts that she knew already had some student representation to the board. And she was able to collect info from West Aurora, from Layton, J.S. Morton, and Waukegan, in addition to what I brought back from the Joint Annual Conference from Oswego. And we kind of made a collected database of what works for some districts, what works for others, as far as even specifics, like how many student reps did they have, or how were the students selected, what the expectations of the students or the board were, what the interaction looks like. An example of that is something that was really valuable that we learned is that from one of those districts, having just one student rep for the district was often overwhelming. And the students themselves felt like they felt too much responsibility to speak on behalf of all students as a single student. And as a direct result of that, once we did implement our student advisory committee, we have several students from each high school who form the committee. They rotate, they take turns. These are oftentimes really involved students to begin with. And they're busy. They have a lot on their plate. They have their schoolwork, there are underclassmen and upperclassmen, and they need time to focus on their own things as well. So having that research, especially through Dr. Howard, was a great place for us to start, to know about what the possibilities were and learn from some of maybe the mistakes other places had before we actually jumped in and started to form what would work for us.
Yeah, I think that's really smart to do some crowdsourcing and seeing what has and maybe hasn't worked in districts around Illinois. Because I think some important context to mention is that in Illinois, districts are not mandated or required to have a student on their school board. And in fact, if they do, the student can't participate in voting on anything like that. But it really is
Right.
just making sure that the student population at the school and at the district is represented somehow.
Yes.
It's kind of nice because it gives districts the opportunity to have that if they want it. And to your point, making sure that you're refining it as you go on, working out the kinks, making sure that it's working best for your district. And it's really one of the benefits of being able to do that, where if something like that was mandated, it maybe wouldn't have afforded that much flexibility.
Absolutely.
So it's really good you took that feedback from your students, like, hey, I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed. They are high school students,
Right.
students, so I don't want to dump them with the full board responsibilities. That's a bit
Yes.
unfair, but yeah, that's really, really good that you were listening to them and making sure that they weren't feeling overwhelmed, but still able to participate in practice.
Yeah.
You kind of hinted this already, but
Yeah.
did your team engage with the other districts or learn about their approach to student voice, and then or really insights or strategies that you took away from those conversations?
So yes, the first step was for Dr. Howard to reach out. The second step, where we really engaged with another district, was presented perfectly by going to that presentation at the joint annual conference, because attending that presentation and hearing from the students themselves was so powerful that I was able to go up to them afterward and talk to them and say, hey, would you be willing to meet with our students? We're just trying to figure it out. And you guys seem to have a great system here. We'd love to have some interaction. I had a great conversation with Dr. John Sparlin, the superintendent, and hear his opinion about how things have gone and why it's important to him. And that following March, so March of 2023, we were able to do a Google Meet with our students and their student ambassadors, along with our administration, Dr. Howard, the superintendents for both districts. And it was an incredible meeting. Our students drafted questions beforehand about how they started the program, how they selected students, because that was one of the questions our students had. Should they be elected by their peers? Should it have to be an application-based program? They really wanted to have a diverse group of students, if possible, because we're a very diverse district. And really getting people involved and invested was one of their goals. We got to ask them what concerns they had, how they managed those. So it was really like a deeper dive into the mechanics of how it really works and what it looks like in Oswego. And then our students were able to go back and reflect. And then they came up with a presentation for our board. And then our board offered feedback about what our concerns were based on our needs and our ability to engage with the students. And that's really what helped us formulate how we were going to make it start, at least in our district.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought up the panel, being able to talk with the student presenters at the end of it. Again, just highlights another strength of attending the joint annual conference. It's an in-person networking event, and those types of conversations really do shine the best when you're in person, face-to-face, having those types of conversations. And then you can start work like this in your district. So that is a really cool, I'm glad you guys had that opportunity to be able to talk with those students and engage with the district and get those meetings with your students going. So that's, again, just student collaboration is really cool to see at that level.
We really appreciated their time. We learned so much from it, and it was engaging. It was energizing. It was exciting. And it wouldn't have been possible if we just watched a recorded presentation somewhere. You're right. Being live and in person made the whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. So we've talked about what the pipeline looked like from kind of like inception to implementation. Could you share a couple examples of how student voice is now being elevated in your schools?
Yeah, it varies a little bit by school. So we have several students on the committee from each of our 3 high schools. And the way student voice is incorporated varies a little bit by the school. Advisory committee members collect information from their classmates. They've created and submitted their own surveys for their classmates to fill out about what they feel are the most important issues facing their unique school communities. In one of the schools, for example, they were particularly focused on vaping. and how the school could better support students who receive disciplinary action, maybe through an education program. So that's one thing they were able to bring to the attention of not only their building administration, but at the district level, because that can be things that other schools can learn from as well. In another school, there was a larger focus on recycling and how the students could be more active, making sure that the school is practicing environmentally conscious decisions with even food waste and paper. And then we as a board have been really lucky to have a couple sessions with the entirety of the student advisory committee to ask their opinion on specific issues that are forefront of our minds. So this year, for example, we had a meeting to talk to them about their feelings about cell phones. Cell phone use in the classroom, whether it was a hindrance for their education or a help, when they should be able to use it and how, and what has their experience been in the schools. So we had the entire board, the entire student advisory committee. We were able to just freely ask questions, get a bunch of different perspectives. And as parents and community members, I think we oftentimes imagine what our students might be thinking, or, I have my own students in the district and I can get their perspective. But it really has been incredibly valuable for us as board members to hear it straight from the students themselves and from a collective of students who have taken the time to talk to their peers and learn what their opinions are and learn about what's important to them. And it gives us another level of accountability and authenticity for our decision making. It's been really beneficial.
Yeah, and I'm really glad you brought up the benefit of it. Kind of takes the guesswork out of how will our students perceive this, or what do you think our students are thinking? Because they're right there. They have the representative there to tell you how they feel about something. And I think the issues you mentioned that they brought up to your board really shows how diverse they can be depending on which school they go to and their age range and things like that. Because just the things that affect students, sometimes by generation, they don't change. Bullying's always one of them, but newer things like cell phones, that's a conversation happening at plenty of districts across the state now, especially if they should even be in the classroom at all. It's just really great to have that opportunity of how our students wrangling with this right now on the ground, so to speak, and then how can we as a board help support our students to make sure their learning environments as conducive as it can be.
Yes.
That's just incredible work there. So it sounds like there was a lot of steps and a lot of people involved with the decision process of how to implement this in the school. You mentioned a couple other districts and some staff at the district. What kind of feedback have you received from the student staff and even the community about these changes? And has there been anything surprising or moments that really affirmed that that we made the right decision to have student voices at our board?
I can comfortably say that feedback has been, by and large, very positive. We include the students in our board meetings, so they're present at board meetings. We also have started to make sure that we include an opportunity for them to ask presentations by administration. They tend to ask questions on topics they feel most impacted by, such as a new course offering or textbook proposals, rather than like the dry budgetary things.
Yeah,
but we're happy to have their input regardless. Something else that has been really, I wouldn't say surprising so much, but I would say affirming, has been seeing these students take the initiative to provide opportunities for conversations within their own school communities. So, for example, a group of our student advisory committee students at one of the schools hosted an open discussion forum about the conflict in Israel for their fellow students. Rather than just a one-sided presentation, they provided an opportunity for their classmates to ask honest questions and really learn about the experiences of other people on both sides of the conflict. They heard about that need from their classmates, about the need for a space to have an open conversation and a true conversation. And they did it, and they carried it out. And that kind of open conversation, I feel like, is exactly what we need to grow students into future leaders who are interested in understanding other people rather than shouting them down.
Sure.
It's more connection than division. And giving these students in the student advisory committee the platform to be able to hear what their classmates are asking for and then help provide it has been really powerful.
Cool. Yeah. And that's really encouraging to hear that the students are taking some self-initiative to make space for conversations that are just kind of hard to have sometimes. And it also shows, in my opinion, it shows how having student voices at your board isn't a one-side. It doesn't just benefit the board. It benefits the student body, because once students feel the empowerment to kind of as a collective start having conversations about board decisions, they can spin that off and have their own discussions as student bodies, and make sure their little community is kind of together and understanding about where everyone's at. Because again, it's, as you mentioned, it's a diverse district. I'm sure many districts have huge diversity across their student body, and just hearing all the different opinions and perspectives, it's really cool to have a space that students can do that where they otherwise maybe wouldn't feel like they had a voice or an opportunity to make those types of connections with their peers.
Yes, I agree.
So looking ahead, it sounds like this is a great success. So how do you envision student voice continuing to evolve in your district? And are there any new initiatives or goals on the horizon?
So I firmly believe it will continue to evolve and grow in our district. What exactly it will look like, I'm not sure. What we're learning as we're a couple of years into this process is that it will depend on the goals and desires of the students on the committee in any given year. I think at the beginning, I know at least for myself as a board member, I imagined we were setting up a formalized structure, how everything would unfold and how we would interact. And the reality is that it's more of an organic living thing. So it grows and changes necessarily to meet the needs of the students on the committee. What isn't changing, though, is making sure that we provide opportunities to ask our students about issues that are important in the district, ask their students what they think the issues are, and how we can come perhaps to solutions together for some of those things. We've set up the protocol for to have those collective meetings to hear from them. But again, how or what that exactly looks like going forward is an unknown. It's a question for the future. What I do know is that we've, as a board, made a commitment now also through board policy. We've included it in our board policy that we will engage with student voice in the form of the Student Advisory Committee. And we have, for the students, made it a serious responsibility, and we remind them of that in the form of the student board oath that they take, that is modeled after the board member oath, about truly trying to represent the community, and reminds them of that level of responsibility that they have to serve as a representative. So those pieces are in place, but exactly how it will look, I don't know. I'm excited to see.
Yeah, it sounds really exciting. And it's a hard question, because no one's got the crystal ball to know what does this look like 10 years from now. It's largely reliant on how different generations of students interact with one another. I would say the way that students interact now probably is a lot different than when I was in school. And I say that as someone who cell phones in the classroom wasn't really something that anyone really batted an eye at. So it's kind of interesting to see that even students are kind of fed up with it.
Yes.
As much as the teachers were back when I was in high school. But yeah, things change all the time. It's incredible how much can change. Think 5 years ago, what the average learning experience was like. Oh my gosh, we're all home. So again, it's just so much can change. There's so many factors, and it's really important to stay not just diligent, but also flexible with making sure you're meeting your students where they're at. Because then that's just how that type of board participation can really succeed. So what advice would you give to other districts that are inspired by your journey, but maybe aren't sure where to start when it comes to amplifying student voice?
I think that one's kind of straightforward for me. It was so beneficial to learn about others' experiences. And I really got that spark from the presentation at the joint annual conference, because it gave me a direct connection to people. So the best advice first is to reach out and have conversations with districts who have implemented student voice, to do a little research there to see, get your students talking to each other. Second, don't be in a hurry.
Yeah.
Our students were really anxious to get something going ASAP. They wanted it to happen tomorrow. But the truth is, especially at the board level, and I don't think I'm alone here, change takes time, and nothing on the board moves rapidly, except in case of emergency. And changing policy, changing practice, it takes investment from a lot of different voices and some compromise. So that takes time. And as you mentioned, lastly, the ability to be flexible and have open and honest, authentic conversations with students who are interested is really important, because they need to have just as much stake in forming what that looks like. rather than being told by the board or administration what they will do, they need to be invested. That's the point of having student voice, right? Hearing what they have to say, their ideas, their opinions, and then trying to work together on finding something that is a meaningful relationship for both sides, or a relationship where students can feel seen and heard. And as board members, we know that we are making sure to touch base and really weigh heavily what our most important stakeholders feel. The students themselves. Having that kind of symbiotic, flexible relationship is really important, but it does take time.
I agree. Yeah. Like all good things take time, but making that investment is very worthwhile, it sounds like, especially in the case of your district. I think it's a great example of that type of investment, that time, taking the effort to make sure you're doing it right. It pays off big dividends and something that can perpetuate itself, throughout the years. So that's really, really cool to hear. Well, Allison, thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your story about how student voices can be more amplified at your district, especially when being inspired from a panel at conference. I think a lot of people are going to take a lot away from this and hopefully feel inspired to maybe implement something similar in their own districts. I think you made some really good points about how districts can just get started. And of course, highly recommend everyone attend the joint annual conference so you can do the in-person networking and just learn from one another. Allison, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you, Isaac.
Thank you for listening to the podcast, and thank you for your dedicated volunteer service to public education. If you would like to stay up to date with future episodes, please consider following us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube Music, or your platform of choice. Have a comment or question? We welcome listener feedback and invite you to send us an email at communications@iasb.com. Thank you.